Hey everybody, welcome back. Wayne here. This week we're going to talk about infidelity-specific counseling. Because when it comes to the services offered by many general LPCs or MFTs or social workers, there seems to be little positive momentum that's gained, especially in the cases of infidelity. I think it's that they genuinely are good people and they mean well and they may have some really good training. But when it comes to the topic of infidelity, there really is very little training out there on the subject. And unfortunately, there are many therapists out there who profess to be experts in the field of treating infidelity. But in reality, they may have treated just a few cases. In an attempt to use that minimal experience, expert doesn't always mean expert. They label themselves as that, but in reality, they may be great marriage therapists or couples therapists, but really have very little training or experience in infidelity. And it is very specific in the way you handle this. So if you've been to the AR website, you may have done the affair analyzer. And in that tool alone, there are over 850 different outcomes associated with the results. And if there's one thing you continually hear from us at Affair Recovery, it's that every situation is uniquely different. Sure, we can paint this broad brushstroke with the actions of both the unfaithful and the betrayed spouses and what it's like and what they need to do, but every situation is a little bit different. And it's going to be highly subjective in how it plays out in your own life and in your relationship. And it's going to require a skilled and knowledgeable approach with a therapist that has been down this road most likely and has come out on the other side and really has worked with hundreds, if not thousands, of cases of infidelity. It's a highly specialized field. The late pioneer of infidelity recovery is this woman named Peggy Vaughn. And she surveyed over 1,000 people whose spouses had had affairs. And she asked a couple of interesting questions regarding the effectiveness of counseling. And one of the questions she asked was the counselor helpful? And remember, over 1,000 people responded. So 57% said no, and it was mostly frustrating. 23% said yes, but not as much as they had liked. And only 20% said yes, it was very helpful. So something is really wrong when over half of the respondents not only say that their experience wasn't helpful, but it was also frustrating. And that's based only on one therapist or their first therapist that they worked with. The second question that she asked was, did the counselor focus directly on the issues of the affair? And this is what's astounding. And it's not surprising, is that 59% of them said no. They mostly focused on the general marital issues. That's the biggest mistake that we hear about. 28% said yes, but not as strongly or as clearly as they had liked. And only 13% said yes, they dealt with it very directly and head on. Again, it's sad that only 13% of the therapists knew how to address infidelity, or even knew that the infidelity had to be addressed first before other issues in the marriage could be talked about. I suspect, and we see this a lot, is that the other therapists fall into this trap of cause and effect, which tends to blame the marriage or the hurt spouse for the affair. So when that happens, couples then walk away feeling more frustrated, but oftentimes more hopeless and even more angry at their inability to gain any kind of traction or ground in both their individual recoveries and in the recovery of the marriage or the relationship. In all my experience and in all the resources at Affair Recovery, we want both spouses to feel safe and validated. It's so important not to belittle or beat up either one of you, because an objective atmosphere is pivotal if we're going to create space for the individual and for the relationship to find healing and a new life, even after such a difficult past, and utilizing a one-size-fits-all approach causes more damage and not only frustrates, but can create more trauma as well. Many times spouses wrongly receive the message that if they had only had more physical intimacy, their spouse would have never cheated. Or if they would have simply stopped talking about the affair, they could finally develop some new momentum in the marriage and get things going. Alternatively, unfaithful spouses can hear the message that it's totally normal for their betrayed spouse to physically abuse them or harm them, or hearing a message that you should have never cheated and this would have never happened. And not to mention, it's about every week we hear of a therapist informing a client to simply divorce their mate because that's what they would do. And many times it's because they have been through that themselves. And I just heard this story earlier this week where a therapist told one of the clients that I'm working with now that that's what she would do. She would just divorce them. And she even named it as her bias. And that's good and healthy when a therapist can come and say, this is what I would do, and it may not help you. So it gave the client the power. She knew where she was coming from and that she might not be able to be impartial. And if you find that your therapist isn't being impartial, then maybe they're not the right therapist for you. And that's not to say that one day your therapist might agree with you, and then the next time they might agree with your spouse. That's going to happen. But if this overarching pattern of impartiality, if that's a word, is there, then it's probably time to find somebody that knows what they're doing. I feel so strongly about this because traumatized lives, like yours and mine, are far too important to generalize. Infidelity and addiction require this delicate and skilled approach to address the issues in both spouses while providing hope for a future. And it's true, you got to remember this. You hear Rick and I say it all the time, is that hurting people hurt people. Don't be surprised if your therapist goes back to heal some old wounds from childhood or adolescence or other relationships. All of that is in service of you and of this relationship that you're now working on. And even though your therapist may do some of that, I just want to encourage you that when you're in your session with a therapist, even if it is in service of a relationship, that session should be about you and not your spouse, not their parents, not the affair partner. It ought to be about you and your healing and in service of that. And having said all that, I can think of no better place for couples to start or continue their recovery journey, regardless of what type of therapist you've had in the past, than EMS Online. It's a course that's offered through Affair Recovery. And what you get there is this time-tested program that was developed by Rick Reynolds, who has over 35 years in infidelity recovery. And I know because I participated in a precursor, a very primitive version of that course 25 years ago in his office. And then that course is going to be led by men and women who have traveled this road and been there before you. And they want nothing more than to help you work through all the intricacies and the little losses and the big losses that infidelity brings. And not only infidelity, but sexual addiction as well. So I hope you'll go to the Affair Recovery website at affairrecovery.com, and underneath the Programs and Courses tab, all the information is there about the EMS Online course. Thanks so much for joining me again this week. It's always good to be with you. Know that we at Affair Recovery are hoping for the best for you, especially during this crazy time on our planet. Thanks so much for joining me, and I'll be back again next week.